The air in the Vance Publishing mailroom always smelled the same. A dry, papery scent mixed with the bitter tang of industrial-strength coffee from the perpetually stained pot in the corner. It was the smell of forgotten things and stagnant ambition. For 2 years, it had been the smell of my life. My days were a rhythm of sorting, stamping, and wheeling carts through beige corridors, my hands stained with ink, my mind numb with the sheer, soul-crushing monotony of it all. But at night, in my shoebox apartment that overlooked a brick wall, I became someone else. I became a writer. I poured everything I had into a manuscript that felt more real to me than my own reflection. It was a story of loss and quiet hope, the kind of story that Vance Publishing, with its glossy bestsellers about spies and star-crossed billionaires, would never touch. Still, I'd submitted it through the proper channels, a digital file sent into a void, where it was likely deleted by an algorithm before a human eye ever saw it. My existence at Vance was deliberately invisible. I kept my head down, my interactions brief and polite. I was Leo, the quiet guy from the mailroom. No one knew about the words I bled onto the page every night. No one knew about the aching loneliness that had settled deep in my bones after my parents were gone, leaving me with a mountain of medical debt and an education I couldn't afford to finish. I'd built my life around a single principle: safety. Safety meant a steady, if miserable, paycheck. It meant no risks, no attachments, no hope that could be weaponized against me. It was a small, gray life, but it was mine. The only crack in that gray facade was Julian Vance. He was the founder, the publisher, the ghost in the machine. A man who existed more as a legend than a person. I saw him maybe once a month, a tall, silver-haired figure stepping out of a black car, his suit perfectly tailored, his face a mask of calm authority. He was older, probably in his late 50s, with lines around his eyes that suggested not weariness, but a profound and constant state of observation. He never smiled, not in a broad or easy way, but sometimes I'd see the corner of his mouth twitch as he spoke to his assistant, a flicker of something private and contained. I watched him from the mailroom window with a feeling I couldn't name, a dangerous cocktail of awe, envy, and a deep, unsettling yearning. He was everything I was not: powerful, secure, visible. He was a fantasy, a sun I could only glimpse from the bottom of my well. That afternoon began like any other. The clock on the wall ticked with agonizing slowness toward 5. My cart was empty, the last of the inter-office mail delivered. I was wiping down the sorting table when my supervisor, a perpetually stressed man named Gary, slammed a heavy cardboard box onto the counter. "This just came by courier," he grumbled, not looking at me. "It's for the penthouse. For Mr. Vance himself. And the courier said it's urgent." He tapped the label. "Security was supposed to handle it, but they're dealing with some fire alarm drill on the 10th floor. It needs to go up now. He's leaving for the night in 15 minutes. My heart gave a nervous thud. The penthouse. The mythical space on the 30th floor, directly above the corporate offices. It was Mr. Vance's private residence and office, a place no one below the executive level ever saw. Protocol was clear. Packages for him went through his personal security chief, never directly from someone like me. Shouldn't I just leave it with his assistant's desk on 29? I asked, my voice small. Gary was already walking away. His assistant left an hour ago. Just take it to the private elevator lobby. Someone will meet you there. Don't mess it up. My hands felt cold as I picked up the box. It was heavier than it looked. My worn messenger bag, containing my lunch Tupperware and the only printed copy of my manuscript, was slung over my shoulder. I'd brought it with me that day on a whim, a foolish, talismanic gesture, as if its physical presence in the building could somehow change its fate. Now, its weight felt like an anchor. I walked through the quieted corridors, the echo of my worn work boots loud in the empty space. The private elevator was in a secluded alcove, marked by a simple, unmarked mahogany door. I used my low-level keycard, and to my surprise, it beeped green. The door opened not into an elevator, but into a small, marble-floored lobby. And it wasn't empty. Julian Vance stood by the elevator doors, shrugging on a dark wool coat. He wasn't looking at his phone or speaking to anyone. He was just standing there, waiting. He turned his head as the door clicked shut behind me, his gray eyes landing on me with an unreadable expression. They were the color of a winter sky just before a snow, deep and quiet and vast. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. Up close, he was even more intimidating. The sheer stillness of him was a force of nature. I have a package for you, Mr. Vance, I stammered, holding out the box like an offering. Gary, from the mailroom. He said it was urgent. He didn't move immediately. His gaze dropped from my face to the box, then to the worn strap of my messenger bag, where the corner of my manuscript's cheap black binder was peeking out. His eyes lingered there for a beat too long. A strange, hot wave of self-consciousness washed over me. I felt exposed, as if he could see right through the canvas and leather, right through my skin, and read the title page of my soul. Finally, he took a step forward and accepted the box, his fingers brushing mine for a fraction of a second. The contact was nothing, a whisper of warmth, but it sent a jolt straight up my arm. Thank you, he said. His voice was lower than I'd imagined, a calm baritone that seemed to absorb the sound in the small room. It held no condescension, only a quiet, measured courtesy. I nodded, my throat tight. You're welcome, sir. I turned to leave, my mission accomplished, eager to retreat to the safety of my invisibility. Wait, the word stopped me cold. I turned back. He had placed the box on a small marble table and was looking at me again, his head tilted slightly. That impossibly perceptive gaze was fixed on my bag. You look like you have a story to tell, he said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. My mind went completely blank. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears. He knew. Of course he didn't know. How could he? But it felt like he did. It felt like he saw the ink on my fingers and the exhaustion in my eyes and understood their secret language. He gestured with his chin toward the elevator. The doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing a cabin paneled in dark, polished wood. Come upstairs, he said, his voice dropping even lower. Pitch it to me. The world tilted on its axis. This wasn't happening. This was a dream, a stress-induced hallucination. Mailroom guys didn't get summoned to the penthouse by the billionaire owner of the company. It was a joke, a test. I was about to be fired for breaking protocol. But his expression held no trace of humor. It was serious, patient. He was waiting for my answer. My body felt disconnected from my brain. I watched, as if from a great distance, as my own feet took a step forward, then another, carrying me across the marble floor and into the elevator. The doors slid shut, encasing us in a silent, warm, wood-paneled box. Julian Vance pressed the button marked P. There was no sound as we began to ascend, only a slight, weightless feeling in the pit of my stomach. He stood beside me, not too close, but his presence filled the small space. I could smell the faint, clean scent of his wool coat, something like cedar and cold night air. I was terrified, and for the first time in a very long time, I was not entirely numb. I was horribly, breathtakingly awake. The elevator opened directly into his apartment. There was no hallway, no foyer. One moment we were in a gilded cage. The next we were standing in a space so vast and quiet it felt like a cathedral. The far wall was a sheet of glass, 2 stories high, looking out over the glittering sprawl of the city as dusk began to settle. The furniture was minimal and elegant. A low-slung gray sofa, a single leather armchair, a long, dark wood table that was clearly a workspace. There were no photographs, no clutter, just books. Bookshelves lined every available wall, filled not with the glossy bestsellers from his own company, but with old, leather-bound volumes and well-worn paperbacks. The air smelled of old paper, lemon oil, and the faint, clean scent of rain from the darkening sky outside. Julian set the package on the large table and turned to face me. He slid his coat from his shoulders and draped it over the back of a chair with an economy of movement that was mesmerizing. He was wearing a simple gray sweater over a white-collared shirt. Without the armor of his suit and coat, he looked less like a corporate titan and more like a scholar in his private library. He was still intimidating, but the nature of that intimidation had changed. It was no longer about power, but about a profound and unshakable self-possession. "Can I get you something?" he asked, his voice calm in the immense silence of the room. "Water? Coffee?" "Water would be fine," I managed to say, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. He nodded and moved toward a sleek, unobtrusive kitchen at one end of the open space. I stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, my messenger bag clutched in my hand like a shield. I felt like an intruder, a field mouse who had accidentally wandered into a lion's den. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to apologize for the misunderstanding and flee back to the familiar, suffocating safety of the mailroom. But I didn't move. I was transfixed by the quiet competence of his movements as he retrieved a heavy glass from a cabinet and filled it with water from a dispenser in the refrigerator door. He did it himself. There was no staff, no butler materializing from a hidden doorway. The simplicity of the act was disarming. He brought the glass to me, his fingers a careful distance from mine as I took it. The glass was cool and solid in my trembling hand. "Thank you," I said again, the words feeling inadequate. He gestured toward the two chairs positioned near the window, a comfortable distance apart. "Please, sit." He waited until I had sunk into one of the soft leather chairs before taking the other. He didn't sit behind his large desk. He sat opposite me, an equal. It was a deliberate choice, a subtle dismantling of the hierarchy that separated us. He leaned back, lacing his fingers over his knee, and simply waited. He didn't rush me. He didn't demand I perform. The silence was not empty. It was expectant, a space he had created for me to fill. The weight of his attention was immense, a physical pressure. It was terrifying, but it was also the first time in years that anyone had looked at me with such focused, genuine curiosity. He wasn't looking at the mailroom clerk. He was looking at the man he believed had a story to tell. My throat was dry. I took a sip of water. The city lights were beginning to prick the deepening twilight, a million tiny promises of lives being lived, stories unfolding. I thought of my manuscript, of the years of lonely nights I had poured into it. It was the only thing of value I possessed. And this man, this impossible man, was inviting me to share it. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but something else was stirring alongside it. A tiny, fragile flicker of courage. I set the glass down on the small table between us. I took a deep breath. "My book," I began, my voice wavering slightly. "It's called The Quiet Machinery." As I started to speak, a strange thing happened. The fear didn't vanish, but it receded, pushed to the background by the story itself. I told him about my protagonist, a clockmaker in a small, forgotten town who inherits a shop filled with unfinished timepieces, each one representing a life story left incomplete. I told him about the quiet grief that permeates the town, and how the clockmaker learns to find connection not by fixing the clocks, but by listening to the stories of the people who brought them in. I talked for what felt like hours, losing myself in the world I had created. I forgot I was in a billionaire's penthouse. I forgot I was a mailroom clerk. I was just a storyteller, and he was my audience. And he was the best audience I had ever had. He didn't interrupt. He didn't check his phone. He just listened, his gray eyes fixed on my face, his expression intent. He absorbed my words, his focus so absolute it felt like he was helping me pull the story from my very soul. When I finally trailed off, my throat hoarse, the apartment was dark, illuminated only by the soft glow of a single lamp and the vast, glittering tapestry of the city below. I was emotionally exhausted, raw and exposed. I had given him everything. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant, as if he were still walking the streets of my fictional town. I held my breath, bracing for the verdict, for the polite dismissal, the gentle letdown. "The unfinished clocks," he said at last, his voice soft. "They're a metaphor for unresolved grief." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of deep, intuitive understanding. He saw it. He saw the heart of my story, the thing I had tried so hard to build in the dark. A wave of relief so profound it almost made me dizzy washed over me. "Yes," I breathed. "That's it." "Exactly," he nodded slowly. "It's been a long time," he said, more to himself than to me. "Since a story felt necessary." He looked at me then, and the professional mask was gone. In his eyes, I saw a flicker of something I recognized, something that mirrored the ache in my own chest. It was a profound and deep-seated loneliness. In this vast, beautiful, empty space, surrounded by a city of millions, Julian Vance was alone. The realization struck me with the force of a physical blow. The power dynamic that had so terrified me suddenly felt irrelevant. We were just two men in a quiet room, connected by a story about loneliness and the hope of connection. He seemed to sense the shift in the air. He leaned forward slightly, his expression softening. "I know what this must look like," he said, his voice low and even. "Me up here. You, from the mailroom." I want you to be very clear about something. Leo, he knew my name. Of course, he'd seen my ID badge, but hearing it from his lips, spoken so carefully, made my heart skip a beat. This, he continued, gesturing to the space between us, is about your words. The story you just told me. Nothing else is expected. There are no hidden terms. He was addressing the unspoken fear, the ugly assumption that his interest came with a price I couldn't, or wouldn't, want to pay. He was handing me back my agency, making sure I knew I was in control. I looked at his hands, resting on his knees. They were capable hands, with long fingers and clean, trimmed nails. The hands of a man who built an empire, but they were held loosely, without tension. I thought about the way his fingers had brushed mine when he took the package, the brief, inconsequential warmth. It hadn't felt inconsequential at all. My internal monologue was a frantic buzz of analysis. I replayed every moment since I'd stepped into the lobby. His patient gaze, the way he'd sat with me, not above me, the insightful way he'd listened, the care he was taking now to dismantle the power imbalance between us. Every action was measured, respectful. He wasn't a predator. He was careful. He was treating me not as an employee, not as an opportunity, but as a person whose comfort mattered. This carefulness, this quiet consideration, was more seductive than any overt display of power could ever be. It was a steady warmth seeping into the cold, frightened corners of my heart. I had spent years building walls to keep myself safe, and this man was not trying to tear them down. He was showing me the door and assuring me it was unlocked. Why? The question escaped me before I could stop it. Why me? He considered the question for a moment. I spend my days surrounded by people who want something from me, he said, his gaze unwavering. They tell me what they think I want to hear. Their stories are polished, market-tested. When I saw you standing in that lobby, holding that manuscript like it was the most important thing in the world, I saw someone who wasn't performing. I saw honesty. It's a rare commodity. His words landed like stones in a still pool. Honesty. He saw honesty in me. He saw the writer, not the mailroom clerk. He saw the story I was trying to tell with my life, not just with my words. A tension that I hadn't even been aware of holding began to release from my shoulders. The ever-present fear of being misunderstood, of being overlooked, of being invisible, started to dissolve in the quiet safety of his gaze. He stood then, and for a heart-stopping second, I thought the meeting was over. He walked over to his desk, my manuscript still sitting where I'd left it beside my chair. He picked it up, handling the cheap binder with a reverence that made my throat tighten. He didn't open it. He just held it, weighing it in his hands. This deserves to be written, he said, turning back to me. Without the distraction of a job that is slowly killing your soul, here it comes, I thought. The offer. The gilded cage. Vance Publishing would like to offer you a contract, Leo, he said, his tone shifting slightly, becoming more formal, yet no less kind. A standard advance for a debut author. But more than that, I want to offer you the resources to finish it properly. There is a small guest house on my property upstate. It's quiet, private. You could write there, undisturbed. We would provide a stipend for your living expenses for the next 6 months, my mind reeled. A contract, a guest house, a stipend. It was everything I had ever dreamed of, laid at my feet. It was a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. And it was terrifying. It was too much, too fast. The strings had to be there, hidden beneath the surface. I can't accept that, I whispered, the words tasting like ash. The old fear, the habit of refusing help, of trusting no one, was a powerful reflex. It's too generous. I couldn't possibly. You can, he interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. He took a step closer, closing some of the space between us. And you can say no at any point. You can walk away tomorrow, and the offer for the book from the publishing house, the official, legal offer, will still stand. That part is business. It will be handled by my lawyers and your agent, should you choose to get one, which I recommend. He paused, letting his words sink in. He was deliberately, carefully separating the professional from the personal. He was building a firewall between the two, ensuring I understood that one was not contingent upon the other. The other part, he continued, his voice softening again. The guest house, the time to write, that is from me, not from the publisher. It is an investment in a talent I believe in. Your safety and your freedom are not part of the negotiation. They are non-negotiable. I looked up into his eyes, and I saw it then, clear as day. The subtext that had been humming beneath the entire conversation. It wasn't just about the book. His interest was in me, the man who wrote the book. The loneliness I had sensed in him was real. He was reaching out, not from a position of power, but from a place of shared humanity. He was offering a connection, but he was doing it with such profound respect for my autonomy that it left me breathless. All my carefully constructed walls crumbled. The fear, the cynicism, the years of guarded isolation, they all washed away, leaving behind a raw, aching vulnerability. And in that vulnerable space, a single, terrifying truth bloomed. I wanted this. I wanted the book deal, yes. But more than that, I wanted the quiet space he was offering. I wanted the safety of his consideration. I wanted to know the man who saw me so clearly. A tear I didn't know was coming escaped and traced a hot path down my cheek. I quickly wiped it away, embarrassed. His expression softened into something impossibly tender. "Leo," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what you want from me." I confessed, the words raw and honest. It was the heart of my fear, laid bare. He didn't hesitate. His answer was simple, direct, and devastatingly honest. "I want to read the rest of your book," he said, his eyes holding mine. "And I want to have dinner with the man who wrote it." If he's willing, the world stopped. He had laid his cards on the table. One professional desire, one personal. Both framed as a request, leaving the choice, the power, entirely in my hands. He wasn't a billionaire publisher making a demand. He was a man, asking for a date. A shaky laugh escaped me. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. The tension that had been coiling in my chest for years finally, blessedly, snapped. "Yes," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I'm willing. A slow smile spread across his face. It was the first real smile I had seen from him, and it transformed his features, erasing the lines of authority and revealing a surprising warmth. It reached his eyes, making them shine in the lamplight. "Good," he said softly. He closed the remaining distance between us. He moved slowly, giving me ample time to retreat, to object. But I stood my ground, my heart hammering against my ribs. He raised a hand, not to my face, but to the worn strap of my messenger bag, his fingers gently tracing the frayed canvas. It was an achingly tender gesture, an acknowledgement of where I came from, of the journey that had brought me to this room. Then, his gaze met mine, questioning, asking for permission without a single word. I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He lifted his hand and gently cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking softly along my cheekbone. His skin was warm and dry, his touch steady and sure. It wasn't a gesture of ownership, but of reverence. He leaned in, and I met him halfway. His lips were softer than I could have imagined. The kiss was not hungry or demanding. It was a question, a discovery. It was slow and deep and breathtakingly gentle. It tasted of relief, of recognition, of two solitary souls finding a quiet harbor in a storm. It was the feeling of a long-locked door swinging open. It was the feeling of coming home. When he pulled back, he didn't go far. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. I could feel his breath, warm and steady against my lips. My own breathing was ragged. I laced my fingers with his, my hand feeling small and lost in his larger one. His grip was firm, grounding. "Okay," he murmured, his voice a low vibration against my skin. "Okay," I breathed back. It was the most honest word I had ever spoken. In the quiet of that room, with the city lights spread out below us like a fallen constellation, everything was, for the first time, okay. The locked door hadn't been a trap. It had been a sanctuary. And inside, I hadn't been asked to perform. I had only been asked to be seen. The journey back down in the elevator felt dreamlike. Julian didn't ride with me. He walked me to the doors, his hand warm on the small of my back, a silent, reassuring pressure. "My assistant will email you the official offer from the legal department in the morning," he'd said, his voice back to its usual calm, measured tone, but his eyes held the memory of our kiss. "And I will email you personally about that dinner." I'd just nodded, unable to form words. The elevator doors had closed, and I had descended from the heavens back to the mundane world, my feet barely touching the marble floor. Walking out of the silent, empty office building into the cool night air was a shock. The city sounds, the distant wail of a siren, the rumble of a passing bus, felt alien and harsh after the profound quiet of the penthouse. I spent the night in a state of suspended disbelief. Sleep was impossible. I sat in the dark of my tiny apartment, the city's ambient glow filtering through my grimy window, and replayed every moment. His voice, the look in his eyes, the weight and warmth of his hand on my jaw, the impossible, earth-shattering gentleness of his kiss. It felt like a fantasy, a story I had written for myself. I expected to wake up at any moment, the smell of stale coffee in my nostrils, the reality of the mailroom crashing back down on me. The next morning, I went to work. The routine was a comfort, a familiar anchor in the swirling sea of my emotions. I sorted the mail, my hands moving on autopilot. Gary grunted a good morning. The coffee tasted as bitter as ever. Everything was exactly the same, and yet, everything had changed. I felt like I was carrying a fragile, glowing secret in the center of my chest. I worried. The harsh light of day brought doubt creeping in at the edges. Had I misread everything? Was it a moment of madness for him, a whim he now regretted? The chasm between our worlds seemed impossibly wide. He was Julian Vance. I was a nobody, a piece of office furniture. The memory of his tenderness warred with a lifetime of ingrained cynicism. Men like him didn't choose men like me. Not for real. Around 10 o'clock, I was wheeling a cart through the hushed, carpeted hallways of the editorial floor when my cheap phone buzzed in my pocket. I ducked into an empty alcove to check it. There were 2 new emails. The first was from Vance Publishing Legal Department. The subject line was Offer of Publication, The Quiet Machinery. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was all there, in stark black and white. A formal, legally binding offer. The advance was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It was real. It was happening. A wave of lightheadedness washed over me, and I had to lean against the wall for support. Then, I opened the second email. The sender was J. Vance. No corporate signature, just his initial. The subject line was simply tonight. My heart hammered against my ribs. The body of the email was short, but every word felt carefully chosen. Leo, I hope you slept better than I did. I meant what I said. All of it. Let's have that dinner tonight. There's a small Italian place I like, quiet and private. Or, if you prefer, you can choose anywhere you'd be comfortable. Let me know. Julian, relief, sharp and sweet, flooded my veins. I meant what I said. All of it. He was reassuring me, dispelling the morning after doubts he must have known I would have. And he was giving me the choice of venue, another small but significant gesture of ceding control, of ensuring my comfort. He wasn't summoning me. He was inviting me. I typed out a reply with shaking fingers. The Italian place sounds perfect. Thank you. Julian, I hit send before I could second-guess myself. As I pushed my cart back toward the mailroom, my path intersected with the main lobby. And I saw him. Julian was standing near the glass entrance, surrounded by 3 men in sharp suits. He was back in his armor, the powerful CEO, nodding as one of the men spoke animatedly. He looked formidable, distant, a man from another universe. My heart sank. That was his world. This, the mail cart and the beige hallways, was mine. The gulf felt wider than ever. I started to turn away, feeling foolish and small. Then, as if he had a sixth sense, his head lifted. His gaze swept across the expansive lobby and found me. Our eyes met across the polished granite floor. The men he was with, the entire bustling lobby, seemed to fade away. For a split second, it was just the 2 of us. He didn't smile, but the intensity in his eyes was unmistakable. He gave me the smallest, most private of nods. It was a confirmation, a promise. I see you. And it was enough. The doubt vanished, replaced by a steady, quiet warmth. I nodded back, a small gesture of my own, before turning and pushing my cart away. My secret was safe. Our secret. That evening, I stood in front of my tiny closet, panicking. I owned 1 pair of decent slacks and a button-down shirt that was starting to fray at the collar. Nothing I had was suitable for dinner with a billionaire. I was about to text him and cancel, to claim I was sick, when I remembered his words. I saw someone who wasn't performing. He hadn't been drawn to a polished exterior. He had been drawn to my honesty. So, I put on my best, slightly frayed shirt. I polished my old leather shoes. I showed up as myself. The restaurant was exactly as he'd described. Quiet, elegant, and understated. A small place tucked away on a side street. He was already there, at a secluded corner table. He stood when he saw me. He was wearing dark trousers and a soft, charcoal-colored cashmere sweater. He looked relaxed. The lines of authority eased from his face. His smile when he saw me was genuine and warm. "Leo," he said, his voice low and welcoming. "I'm glad you came. I'm glad you invited me," I replied, surprised by my own steadiness. The dinner was easy. We didn't talk about the book deal or the publishing house. We talked about everything else. I told him about growing up in a small town, about my parents' love for old movies. He told me about his childhood, a lonely boy in a series of boarding schools who found solace in the library. He spoke of his late wife, who had died years ago, with a quiet, gentle sadness that was not theatrical or self-pitying, but honest. He asked me about my hopes, my fears, the stories I still wanted to tell. He listened with that same unnerving, absolute focus he'd shown in his apartment. As we talked, I began to understand him better. His wealth and power were not the defining features of his personality. They were circumstances, tools he used. At his core, he was a man who loved stories, who valued substance over style, and who was, in his own quiet way, as lonely as I was. "I have a confession to make," he said as we sipped our coffee after the meal. I tensed slightly. "Oh, I knew who you were before you came to my office," he admitted, a wry twist to his lips. "Not your name, perhaps, but I'd seen you. In the mailroom, in the hallways. You have a way of being quiet that is louder than most people shouting. You're an observer." I recognized a fellow traveler. He paused. "And my assistant had mentioned a submission from the mailroom, one that had an intriguing title. I had meant to look for it. You just saved me the trouble." I was floored. He had seen me. All that time I thought I was invisible. He had been watching, noticing. The realization was both unsettling and deeply, profoundly validating. He paid the bill, handling the transaction with a discreet efficiency that drew no attention. As we stepped out into the cool night, a black car was waiting at the curb. "My driver can take you home," he offered. "I can take the subway," I said, the old habit of independence dying hard. "I have no doubt you can," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "But allow me this. It's cold," I relented, and we rode in a comfortable silence through the city streets. The car was a warm, quiet bubble, separating us from the hustle outside. When we pulled up in front of my rundown apartment building, I felt a familiar pang of shame at its shabbiness. He didn't seem to notice. He got out of the car and walked me to the door. Under the flickering fluorescent light of the entryway, he turned to me. "The guest house upstate," he said, his voice soft. "The offer still stands. There are no expectations attached, Leo. Only the hope that you will find the peace to write there." I looked from his steady, earnest face to the peeling paint on my apartment door. Behind that door was loneliness, financial worry, and the constant struggle to find time and space to create. What he was offering was not a cage, but a key. The freedom to be the person I was meant to be. "I accept," I said, my voice clear and firm. He smiled, a slow, beautiful thing. Good he didn't kiss me. Instead, he reached out and took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. His grip was a silent promise. "I'll make the arrangements. Get some rest, Leo." He released my hand and returned to the car. I watched until its red taillights disappeared around the corner. I stood there for a long time, the feel of his hand still warm in mine. Then I went inside, and for the first time, my small, shabby apartment didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a waiting room, the place I was just before my real life began. A week later, I was standing on the porch of the guest house. It was less a guest house and more a perfect, small stone and glass cottage, tucked away in a grove of birch trees a respectful distance from Julian's main house, which I could barely see through the woods. The air was clean and smelled of pine and damp earth. Inside, the cottage was simple, comfortable, and beautiful. A stone fireplace, a comfortable armchair, a sturdy wooden desk with a brand new laptop, and a wall of windows looking out into the forest. The kitchen was stocked. My frayed shirts had been replaced with a few new, soft sweaters and comfortable shirts left in the closet. An anonymous gift, I assumed, to save me any embarrassment. It was an act of quiet, profound care. I spent the first few days just breathing. I walked in the woods, drank coffee on the porch, and slept for 10 hours a night. The constant, low-grade hum of anxiety that had been my companion for years began to fade, replaced by a deep, cellular calm. Julian respected my space. He texted me once a day, a simple good morning, or hope the words are flowing. He didn't visit. He didn't summon me. He was letting me settle, letting me find my own rhythm. He was giving me the gift of solitude without the sting of loneliness. On the fourth day, I sat down at the desk, opened the new laptop, and pulled up my manuscript file. The cursor blinked on a blank page at the end of my last chapter. For a moment, I felt a familiar flicker of fear, the old imposter syndrome whispering that I didn't deserve this, that the words wouldn't come. Then I looked out the window at the quiet, steadfast beauty of the woods. I thought of Julian, of his patient gaze and his steady, respectful belief in me. He had cleared the path. All I had to do was walk it. I placed my fingers on the keyboard, and I began to write. And the words flowed. They came not in a trickle, but in a flood. Freed from the constant stress of survival, my creativity bloomed. I wrote for hours, losing all track of time, completely immersed in my story. When I finally looked up, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I had written 20 pages, and they were good. That evening, there was a soft knock on the door. My heart leaped. It was Julian. He was holding 2 plates, covered in foil. "I made too much dinner," he said, a small, almost shy smile on his face. "I thought you might be hungry." He came in, and we ate together at the small kitchen table. It was a simple meal of roasted chicken and vegetables, but it felt like a feast. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the clink of our forks and the crackle of the fire I had built in the hearth. "It feels like home," I said, the words surprising me as they came out. He looked at me, his expression soft in the firelight. "I'm glad," he said simply. After dinner, we sat in the 2 armchairs before the fire. He didn't ask me how the writing was going. He didn't put any pressure on me at all. We just talked, our conversation meandering like a slow river. It felt natural, easy, as if we had been doing this for years. As the fire died down to glowing embers, a comfortable quiet settled between us. The unspoken attraction that had been simmering since that first night in his office was present, a warm, steady hum in the air. But there was no urgency to it. There was a sense of rightness, of inevitability, that needed no rushing. He stood to leave. "I should let you get back to it," he said, though he made no move toward the door. I stood too, facing him in the warm, dim light. "Julian," I said, my voice quiet. "Thank you. For all of this, there's no need to thank me," he said. "Watching you come alive is all the thanks I need." He was standing so close now, I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that this was real. This man, this quiet, steady, impossibly kind man, was not a fantasy. He was my future. I reached out and placed my hand on his chest, over his heart. I could feel its steady, rhythmic beat beneath my palm. It was the sound of safety, the sound of peace. He covered my hand with his own, his thumb stroking my knuckles. "Stay," I whispered. It wasn't a plea. It was an invitation, an offering. He searched my face, his gaze intense, making sure. I met his eyes without flinching, letting him see everything I was feeling, the gratitude, the desire, the deep, soul-settling rightness of this moment. He leaned down and kissed me. This time, there was no hesitation, no question. It was a kiss of arrival. It was slow and sure and full of a deep, unspoken understanding. It was a promise of quiet mornings and shared silences, of steadfast support and mutual respect. It was the beginning of a new story, one we would write together. In his arms, I was no longer the invisible boy from the mailroom. I was just Leo. And for the first time in my life, that felt like more than enough. It felt like everything. He had answered a call I hadn't even known I was making, a desperate signal from a lonely heart. And he hadn't just opened a door, he had built a home. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow burn male/male love stories, told with warmth and care.